I can't set the time. You saw what time I came in, so you'd have to judge it by, I'd say within 5 minutes prior to the time I arrived here. I might say just one thing further. You're asking about the Vice President. I've never personally seen a man who has taken something which meant a lot to him in quite such a wonderful grace. He's been someone I've admired for a long time, but I admired him more last night and this morning than I ever had before. He's in very good spirits. He looked at this thing philosophically and analytically. I've heard him explaining how this works to his two daughters, and it's really been a privilege to watch.
Herb, would you attribute his cheerfulness partly to the fact that he felt a burden lifted as well as a disappointment?
No, I'm sure that he wanted to win, and we play this game to win, not to hedge on it. But I think it's the fact that he has learned to accept losses with defeats, and this is one of the things which I believe marks big men of our country. Many others have done the same thing.
Louder.
I said that I believe that the Vice President has learned to accept losses with defeats, although he's had very few losses, as you know by his record. But this is one of the things that makes a great man, and that's true of many other great men in our country. The question is, how did Mrs. Nixon take it, and how is Mrs. Nixon this morning? I'd say the same thing for Mrs. Nixon as I said for the Vice President. She was going around last night trying to cheer up members of our own staff when we were concerned maybe we should be cheering her up. And so her first consideration was for our own people. This morning she was with the children and with the Vice President, talking with them about the great American process of voting, and she is also in good spirits.
Herb, you say that the Vice President's telegram refers to the congratulations which he voiced to Senator Kennedy last night. Did you mean to imply by that Mr. Nixon considered his statement on television last night to be a concession of victory?
No, I didn't mean to imply anything other than what the telegram said. The statement last night was one in which he congratulated the senator on the basis of the returns that were available at that time. There have been further returns since that time, as you know, and this is the logical follow-up.
Herb, can you tell us at what time this morning the Vice President decided that this thing was definitely over, and what state led us, or what factor led us to that decision?
The question is, can I tell you what time the Vice President decided this morning that this was definitely over, and what factor led to that decision? I couldn't tell you an exact time because we were discussing the various results as they came in. I'd say that it was probably an hour or more ago. I came down here a little later, though, because I wanted to give the newsmen who I'd promised a couple hours sleep a chance to awaken and breaking this thing at their time.
Herb, what does the Vice President consider to be the key issue resulting from the defeat?
I think the question is, what does the Vice President consider to be the key issue which resulted in his defeat? I think you're getting back to the thing we started off, which was in trying to analyze the results of the election only hours after the results are in. And so that I would not try to analyze it in any detail. I'd only point out that if you want to look at it on a technical basis, the difficulty was in gaining the electoral votes of more of the big key states, since obviously he gained a practically equal popular vote with Senator Kennedy. I've answered the question before whether he's talked to the president, and the answer was no, he has not had an opportunity to. There's a 3-hour difference in time, and the president has been in the cabinet meeting.
Herb, just a moment ago, a two-part question was asked. I believe you didn't quite get around to the second part of it, which was what precisely made Mr. Nixon decide that he had been defeated? Which state? Was it California, perchance?
I'm sorry, I did miss the other part of the question. You're right. No, it was not California. We think that California is still a state which could go either way, and we believe that California is very much up in the air at this point. And I think we know California elections pretty well. As you know, there are are about 6 or 7 million votes cast in the state, and the last returns I saw were only for about 3 million, with the span fairly closely. Now, to answer your question more directly, it was a matter of adding up the count with key states, and we had, for example, the latest ones being Michigan and Illinois. We think we have Illinois. We do not have Michigan. This added up the total. The question was, how did the Nixon daughters take it? The girls, I think, took it as very good sports. They, of course, felt personally involved. This was a contest to them, and they were very proud of their father. They at points last night were cheering the states that were coming in, and this morning when they heard, for example, that Illinois had swung more favorably toward the vice president, why little Julie let out a cheer again, and her father explained to her, well, we have Illinois, but we do not have the election. I'd say these little girls are typical little girls who have a great interest in their father, and Trish, I guess, isn't so little anymore. She's 14, but at any rate, they've taken it in good spirits, and in the way that I'd expect my own two daughters, who are 12 and 14, to do.
How late did the traditional hurt Governor Rockefeller, and how did he take it?
I think you'd have to ask Governor Rockefeller how he took the thing. Governor Rockefeller has been a great help in the campaign to us, and we've had conversations back and forth with him during the evening last night.
Herb, how late did the two girls stay up last night?
The question is, how late did the two girls stay up? I can't answer it because I was sort of busy with you fellas, but I think it was probably till about 11.
And who were they with?
They're with their mother primarily, and also with part of the Nixon family.
What was their reaction to the vice president explaining the results to them?
The question is, what was the girl's reaction when the vice president explained the results to him? I think I'd be foolish to try to interpret the particular reaction of little girls. I can't do this with my own two daughters, as I said, but they in general, I would only comment that they took the thing as something that they, of course, didn't like, but which they accepted, and I think that they gained a great educational experience out of it. When I left them, they were smiling, and they have been all morning. Julie was first up. I found her with her father at 6:30 this morning.
Herb, why did the vice president decide to return to Washington today instead of tomorrow as originally scheduled?
The question is, why did the vice president decide to return to Washington today instead of tomorrow as originally scheduled? He felt with the election passed, and he'd like to get the family on back to home and the girls back in school.
Herb, you haven't heard from the Kennedy forces by any chance, have you yet?
No, I have not heard from the Kennedy forces.
Do you expect to?
I don't anticipate hearing from them, no. I think the last time was we were talking about television debates, and Mr. Salinger was challenging me to something or other. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Herb Klein, the vice president's news secretary, in which, giving a news conference, undoubtedly the final news conference from Nixon camp of this 1960 presidential race, he began the news conference by reading Vice President Nixon's telegram of concession and congratulation to Senator Kennedy. He also said that the vice president is in extremely good spirits, that Mrs. Nixon has been going around this morning consoling other members of the Nixon staff, that the vice president's daughters, 14-year-old Patricia and 12-year-old Julie, were also disappointed as their father explained to them the explanation of the result. He said that the vice president had decided to go back to Washington today because he wants to get the girls back in school. The news secretary gave no indication of Vice President Nixon's future plans, and he declined to speculate about the reasons which led to Senator Kennedy's victory. He emphasized consistently, however, that the vice president was in extremely good spirits. And so ends the last Nixon news conference of this campaign. This is Paul Niven at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
Paul Niven saying that ends the last Nixon press conference may be a rash kind of statement. There have been so many final things and so many last things in this election so far that have turned out not to be final and not to be last. But it seems quite definite now, of course, with the formal concession that Mr. Kennedy has won that election. There was a telegram of congratulation not only from him to Senator Kennedy, now President-elect Kennedy, but also from President Eisenhower at the White House after the president this morning met with his cabinet to work out the mechanics of the transition of government from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration. Excuse me. I should explain in passing that I am not Grant Holcomb, who has been sitting in this chair most of the morning. My name is Stuart Novins, who will be carrying on now. Some of the returns that have been coming in on the states, Illinois with 99% of the total vote. Nixon has a popular vote of 2,322,006. Kennedy, 2,342,438. That indicates the Kennedy lead holding up by about 20,000. We'll be switching in a short while, we think, to Hyannisport, Massachusetts, for a statement by Senator Kennedy. You recall the sequence this morning, very early this morning, was that Senator Kennedy, after he had been told that he was pretty much sure to be the victor in this election, had said that he would not make any claim of victory, would not make any statement of gratitude to the American people for electing him as President of the United States until Vice President Nixon had made his formal concession. This is not quite a question of you do it first and then I'll do it, sort of schoolboy thing. There was very serious doubt as to how this election was going to come out. It seesawed back and forth for a while this morning. In the Illinois thing particularly, Mr. Nixon shot out ahead by something like 4,000 votes when Kennedy had been leading almost all of last night, and then the tide turned the other way too, and Senator Kennedy came back with something like a lead of 21,000 votes in the Illinois board. Grant Holcomb, who was sitting in this chair, is now at the Illinois board, and Grant, if you have any later figures, we'd like to hear about them.
Well, Stuart, it's just a little bit later, but it's still not a final figure for Illinois. This is the figure that we have now, Kennedy leading by a little over 20,000 in Illinois. Just about an hour ago, it was back in the Nixon column, but now back in the Kennedy column, and you know, when it was in the Nixon column, that's when the Nixon child was cheering. The other state that we've been concerned about most of the morning is Minnesota. That's right over across the top of this panel, about 5 panels, and that one is very definitely in the Kennedy column. There is no question about it. Kennedy has carried Minnesota. And then if we go clear on around over to the western board, we'll see that other state that we've been concerned about, and that, of course, is the state of California. But after appraising the situation in California, Vice President Nixon made his decision, and he realized that the tremendous lead that Kennedy had built up in California, although not a spectacular one as far as California elections are concerned, that the lead was substantial enough to carry him to victory in that big state of California with 32 electoral votes. You know, one of the interesting things about the election in the West has been the voting in the 2 new states, the 49th state of Alaska and the 50th state of Hawaii. Been neck and neck in both of those states, and in all probability there's going to be a recount unless some of the votes that are coming into Anchorage by canoe fall into the Kennedy column. It's going to take several days to get all of the votes in up there because of the remote area. Such a remote area, just the other day during the political campaign, airplane came into land at the Anchorage airstrip there, ran into a moose and its young calf, damaged the plane severely, and of course the moose and its calf. Well, that's really the story, Stuart, as far as the boards are concerned. Those 3 states that everyone had been hanging on throughout the early hours of this morning have been put into the Kennedy column definitely, but of course there are figures to come from California and just a few from Illinois. Minnesota definitely is in the Kennedy column.
Right, Grant. Thank you very much. We mentioned a moment ago that telegram from President Eisenhower. In it, he not only congratulated Senator Kennedy on his victory, but he also sent along the message that there would be a more comprehensive letter or telegram or message sent to Senator Kennedy in which the details and the mechanics for the transition of government from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party would be suggested and proposed. We are bringing you a special election report. Now, a word from Westinghouse.
Well, we have the latest winner in the Westinghouse Science Talent Search, Jerry Spitzner. Each year for 19 years, Westinghouse has sponsored a nationwide search for the most promising high school science seniors. And Jerry copped the top honors this year. You're from St. James, Minnesota, aren't you, Jerry?
Yes, sir. St. James High School.
And this is your science project?
Yes, sir. A spherical ion accelerator for atomic research.
It is? Well, I'll have to take your word for that. How many students entered the Science Talent Search?
29,402. Competition.
I see. Jerry won the $7,500 Westinghouse Grand Science Scholarship. And there were 39 additional scholarships and cash awards. How do these students turn out? Well, here are 3 previous winners. Dr. Robert L. Folger, now supervisor of a group of chemists and engineers at the Great Savannah River Atomic Plant. Dr. Charles Sargent is working on nuclear physics at MIT. Dr. Constance Sawyer Warwick is conducting important solar research at the Boulder Laboratories of the National Bureau of Standards. America needs many scientists like these, and Westinghouse is doing its best to help find them. You can be sure if it's Westinghouse.
Well, this must certainly have been one of the most grueling days in the life of Senator Kennedy. By this day, I mean the last 24 hours, when the returns started to come in and that incredible seesaw tallying that went on all last night. Most of us were up with it, those of us here in the studio. And then, after about 5 hours sleep this morning, John Fitzgerald Kennedy awoke to be told by his very close political advisors that California had gone for him, and therefore he was now the youngest man ever to be elected president, the first Catholic chief executive that the United States ever will have had. And then came the reversals, the vote going against Kennedy in Illinois, some very serious question about the vote in California as to whether that was really going to go for him, and the question about Minnesota. Must have been a very nerve-wracking thing, and all the time I'm sure he must have been waiting at Hyannisport for that telegram or telephone call or broadcast or message, whatever form it would take, of concession from Vice President Nixon. Well, now, of course, that has come. The Vice President sent a congratulatory message to Kennedy in Hyannisport. This was also followed by a congratulatory message by the President of the United States and Vice President candidate Henry Cabot Lodge, who, of course, was defeated with Nixon on the Republican ticket, has also sent congratulations to President-elect John F. Kennedy and called upon the American people to close ranks behind Kennedy. That also was the burden of the first message that Mr. Nixon gave to his own party workers very late last night, when he didn't quite formally concede, but he did say at that time, if the trend continues, this means that Mr. Kennedy apparently will be the winner, and that was a pretty good political prediction. The trend did continue after a few variations on the theme, and we do have a Democratic presidential elect. The vice presidential elect, Senator Lyndon Johnson, has let it be known now from his home in Texas that he will not resign his senatorial seat until the very last moment before his inauguration. That would be on January 20th. Johnson has said in the past that he thinks Texas wants experienced leadership in the Senate until the last possible minute, and he qualifies as experienced leadership in the Senate by virtue of his having been the majority leader for so long and so effectively for the Democratic Party. He said that he still feels that Texas holds that view, and therefore he's going to stay in the Senate. Actually, it would be rather an odd thing for Senator Lyndon Johnson to drop out immediately after the election, as he originally had said he might do, and then sort of sit quietly and passively while he waits for January 20th. This doesn't quite seem to be in character with Senator Johnson, who likes activity, of which in the last several weeks he's had a great deal. Johnson is pretty much in seclusion today at his suite in a hotel, and he's being very quiet. He has refused to comment on the election until Senator Kennedy makes his comment, which, of course, is part of the protocol. For many of us who have watched Senator Johnson operate in Washington as the majority leader, it still comes as something of a shock when this tall, rangy Texan talks about young John Kennedy as my leader. That's going to take a little bit of getting used to for the correspondents who cover the political scene in this country. Johnson says that he's willing to go along with anyone that Governor Price Daniel chooses as his interim successor. Daniel, after he appoints an interim senator, must call a special election to fill the vacancy that will be caused by Johnson's resignation when he makes it. Johnson, of course, was reelected in Texas in a very strong personal victory in Texas last night. One of the returns we've just had from the California thing, Kennedy has a 60,000 lead now in California with 75% of the vote counted. So far in New York, the stock market has been reacting to the political news. I don't suppose anyone could really tell you with authority what makes the stock market go up or down, but today it went down. It was a fast dip and a slightly nervous selling bout in the language of Wall Street, and how long it will stay down, whether it will bounce back up again, is a question that I, for one, would not attempt to answer. Another vote in Illinois, 99%. That's just about all of it. That's 9,869 precincts of 10,015 precincts, including 5,166 precincts in Cook County, which is the Chicago area and very heavily Democratic area most of the time. Nixon chose 2,316,000 and Kennedy 2,333,000. California, again, with 77%. I'm afraid that one's been outdated. Perhaps Grant Holcomb has some on that. He's up at the California board. Grant, do you have any late returns? I seem not to have the latest here.
Well, Stuart, the latest ones are posted right here, the 77%, and there you can see the figures. Kennedy's lead. That's the kind of a lead that he has held almost all night in California, and if you're concerned about the fact that there are approximately 6 million votes in the state, there seems to be little need to be concerned. You know, Harry Truman in 1948 carried California by only 18,000 votes. President Eisenhower, when he ran in 1956, carried the state by 600,000 votes, and he carried it by approximately 400,000 votes in 1952. You were mentioning Senator Lyndon Johnson a few moments ago and his resignation. One of the interesting things in the Senate races in the West was the race that was held in the state of Oregon, because it featured Mrs. Maureen Neuberger, the widow of the late senator from Oregon, Senator Neuberger, who died on the 8th of March of this year. The interesting thing about her race was not only the fact that she won and that she will be sitting on the Democratic side of the aisle, the first Democratic woman to sit on that side of the aisle since Hattie Caraway was a Democratic Senate woman from Arkansas. But you were asked to vote twice in the state of Oregon, once for the short term and one for the regular term. And Mrs. Neuberger won the short term as well as the regular term, which will give her just a slight edge in seniority in the Senate. The Senate, of course, will have this time two women, because the Senate woman from Maine, Margaret Chase Smith, was reelected. So, Stuart, there's a look at that very interesting Senate race, a race where you could legally vote twice if you lived in the state of Oregon, and the latest on the California situation, where Senator Kennedy has held that 50, 60, 40,000 vote lead all night long, and as the votes continue to come in later and throughout the day, he is certain to maintain that lead and perhaps increase it.
Right, Grant. There's been a considerable amount of foreign press reaction, as you might expect, to the election. A great deal of interest, of course, among our allies and in Europe. Before we go into a small report on that, let me remind you what I have had to remind myself, that we're waiting for the word from Hyannisport, Massachusetts, where President-elect John F. Kennedy is staying with his family. And just as soon as we get the word, we'll switch down there for what we expect to be his statement statement of recognition of his victory as presidential nominee for the Democratic Party and now the President-elect of the United States. And this was a statement which was held up, according to his news secretary, until Vice President Nixon gave his formal concession. The extreme right-wing press in France and Algeria, the press reactions to the election of Kennedy are pretty much what might be expected. You undoubtedly recall that earlier, then Senator Kennedy took a very strong position in favor of the cause of Algerian independence. That, of course, was long before the campaign. It was long before he became very close to the White House. And in that position, he pretty much went along with the idea of Algerian independence, and this was not an attitude or a position which would have gained for him the very warm affection of Charles de Gaulle, the president of France. As a matter of fact, de Gaulle let it be known to many of his intimates inside and outside the government in Paris that he was not at all happy about this because it made his own job so much more difficult. So the press reactions this morning to the election of John Kennedy reflect the feeling of suspicion, perhaps a sense of apprehension on the part of the French as to what a President Kennedy might do in terms of the French-Algerian situation. There are many people, or at least among those who are involved in the operation of the French government and in watching that operation, there are some people who feel that a possible solution may be near to that Algerian problem, and that any kind of shaking of the boat at this stage of the game might very well upset what could be a peace within the next 6 months, perhaps. David Schonbrun, our Paris correspondent, and I were discussing that just the other night, and he felt that President de Gaulle right now feels that if things can be worked out quietly and if an end comes to the killing in North Africa, that some kind of Algerian referendum and autonomy might be brought about. So that there is a feeling that Kennedy as president might be something that could upset the apple cart. I think most Americans will feel that the president in the White House is not quite the same thing as a candidate running for office, and that the president in the White House is apt to be far more thoughtful and deliberate and contemplative than is a man stumping in a campaign. We're going to see if we can, there it is, on your screen you see a picture of Bob Kennedy's house. Bob, of course, the brother of the president-elect. That also is in Hyannisport, and it's right next to the president-elect's home. That's on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, very lovely country, but we understand that Senator Kennedy is not going to stay there very long, probably for just a few days, and then he's expected to go down to Florida and soak up some of the Florida sunshine and take it easy for a little while. It would seem almost incredible that any man, either Mr. Nixon or Mr. Kennedy, who have gone through the grueling campaigns that both of these men have gone through, and suddenly have the bottom fall out when all the adrenaline stops pumping and all the activity stops. This must be a terrific letdown, and I suppose a good place to allow yourself to be let down is in the sunshine in Florida, and that is what Senator Kennedy intends to do. Again, on foreign press reactions, officials in Bonn, the West German capital, also reacted favorably. And they thought that the possibility of a Kennedy presidency was a very, very good one. What is it? Another shot back to Hyannisport. And this one is John Kennedy's house. That's the home where he is now, and where he is with his wife and his little daughter, and we're expecting him to come out of there momentarily. It's rather cool down in Cape Cod this time of the year, and it would not be the place to try to get a good suntan. We were saying that the arduousness, the difficulty of campaigning is really a terribly demanding thing. That's a lovely home down there in Hyannisport, isn't it? It's a typical sort of Cape Cod thing. People in Hyannisport have come to call the house and Bob Kennedy's house next door, the Kennedy compound, because they had to build a big fence around it in order to keep out people who were anxious to see the possible president during the campaign. And it does, in a way, become a sort of compound. There's a big fence around it, which we can't see at the moment, but perhaps another shot will show it to us. This is one of several homes that the Kennedy family maintains. We've had our CBS News correspondents, of course, traveling along with both candidates for many, many weeks during the campaign, and they're still following on the tracks and will continue to right through the inauguration. And then, as we always do, a CBS News correspondent will be assigned to the White House, and we'll cover the president from there. The shot that we had just a moment ago, I keep looking at that screen up there, the shot we had a moment ago of the Hyannisport, Massachusetts house of the Kennedys is one that we'll be seeing in a few moments when we switch to Hyannisport and President-elect Kennedy comes out to make his public statement or to read the message which he undoubtedly is preparing or has already prepared. Back on our boards again, we'll take a look at the national totals first. The national total for Mr. Nixon is $30,819,184. For Kennedy, $31,326,051. And now let's go up on the board where Grant Holcomb is standing by and see what Grant has for us.
Well, just a quick look at about the only meaningful figure still around, Stuart, and that's the report from California, where Kennedy is still leading. You know, you were talking there about the foreign reaction, Stuart Novins, a few moments ago. I was just curious as to whether or not you had seen any reaction on the wires or any speculation on the wires as to who might be the Secretary of State in a Kennedy administration. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Well, Grant, I haven't seen anything on the wires about that, but we have talked with many people in Washington who are doing the same kind of speculating, and as long as we label it very clearly as speculating, I think I can pass on some of the things that we have heard in Washington and at the United Nations, as a matter of fact. One version is that there are 3 or 4 men who might be considered as logical candidates for the job, or at least as logical possibilities. And they would certainly include Chester Bowles and Adlai Stevenson and 1 or 2 others. But the thing we hear in Washington now is that William Fulbright, the senator from Arkansas and currently the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, might be named as a Secretary of State, with Chester Bowles, who, as you recall, was one of the earliest supporters of Kennedy in the campaign and a man with a tremendous international background of foreign service. He was ambassador to India and has served on Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. Mr. Bowles becoming the head of the United States Information Service, but with cabinet status. And that, of course, would put Adlai Stevenson, according to that thinking pattern, as ambassador to the United Nations, where my own experience would seem to indicate, in talking with delegates, where he would be very highly thought of and respected.
Adlai Stevenson seemed to play a very important part in Senator Kennedy's campaign in California. When Senator Kennedy made his final appearance in California, Governor Stevenson was stumping for him in Portland, Oregon, and the plan was for him to continue stumping up there. But Senator Kennedy, when he got into Los Angeles and saw the situation there, a situation that has been reflected in the returns this evening, he sent an urgent call for Governor Stevenson to return to Los Angeles and to speak for him in front of a huge rally that was held in East Los Angeles. Perhaps you saw it on television. It was a rally that most of the television time was devoted to a speech by Adlai Stevenson. It was very similar to the one in comparison that President Eisenhower made at that rally for Vice President Nixon. As you recall, if you noticed that one, Stuart, it was President Eisenhower doing most of the speaking, and the Vice President had only a brief opportunity to get on and say something. Well, that's just exactly what happened in Los Angeles. Adlai Stevenson delivered a fiery speech for Senator Kennedy, as only the governor can, and Senator Kennedy had only a few minutes to get on television to thank him for what he had done, and his time ran out, and like Vice President Nixon, he didn't have the opportunity to deliver his full speech. But certainly the appearance in Los Angeles at the last few days of the campaign of Adlai Stevenson helped solidify the support of the Adlai Stevenson people, who were not too enthusiastic for Senator Kennedy after the Los Angeles convention. There were a number of reasons for that. One, of course, was the fact that Adlai Stevenson did not get the nomination. But the reasons went deeper in the internal politics of California. They involved the dumping of Paul Ziffren, the Democratic National Committeeman, by Governor Brown, because Paul Ziffren had long been regarded as one of Adlai Stevenson's staunchest supporters and one of the men who had been instrumental in organizing the liberal element of the Democratic Party in California. So Stevenson played a very important role for Kennedy in California. In view of the returns, you might say that it might have been even a decisive role, because his margin in Los Angeles County, the last figure I saw for Los Angeles County, was approximately 40,000 votes in Kennedy's favor. So he certainly figures in as a possible person, as long as we're speculating here, to take an important post in the Kennedy administration. What about some of the other jobs in the administration, Stuart?
Grant, let me beg off from that for just a moment, because we've gotten word that the press secretary for Mr. Kennedy has just come out of the house down at Hyannisport, and we're going to be standing by for a cue to switch down to Hyannisport so that we can pick up the message that Mr. Kennedy now has for the American people. Latest returns we have in from Minnesota, which has been a really seesaw race ever since last night. With 94% of the total vote, we have Nixon with 713,000, Kennedy 728,000. That's in Minnesota with 94% of the vote. That wraps us up for just a moment, and again, it was Grant Holcomb who was sitting here earlier this morning, but now this is Stuart Novins reporting from New York.